so much. So let's, we've got just until about 6 o'clock here to have a discussion here. And I want it to be free flowing kind of discussion. And I'm just going to jump in when there's points to maybe redirect a little bit. But let's start by talking about food resiliency, since that seems to be one of the hot topics here, and the effects of the pandemic for the last couple of years. I'm really hearing a theme coming out from all of you around cooperation and connection and working together and teaching others. And yet we've been in this time where there's been so much disconnection, so much inability for people to be together physically, so much isolation. I'm curious, and feel free to jump in, any of you right now to start with, like, where's your optimism at around building food resiliency, given these kinds of two trends of like more connection and less connection at the same time? Like on a scale of 1 to 10, how optimistic are you feeling? And what kinds of things have you, what kinds of ahas have you had during the last couple of years? Anybody feel like jumping in? Nick's got his hand up. Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
I'm probably overly optimistic in the face of all that's going on, but I think the more crises that appear in our collective sphere, the more people are learning to respond, and just the number of different initiatives and conversations and people that are starting to wake up to the importance of food, and increasing our food resilience and connection through food is amazing. So, you know, there's nothing like a crisis to get people motivated.
Yeah, that's something that you've been seeing, Nick, in this current crisis, is more motivation and more, yeah.
Yeah, seeds are sold out, you know, for a couple of years running now, and that's not just the supply chain issues. That's, I think a lot of people are starting to want to grow their own food and have a garden and connect with their neighbors and start going to the farmers markets.
Yes. Great. And I think that's a real tie-in with the showcase we're going to show, the film we're going to show later. Is about people that responded to that same kind of urgency that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Ed, you had your hand up there too. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I second that idea of don't let a good crisis go to waste. I think that's critical, that we take full advantage of it. I think my optimism is pretty high. I would say, you know, if you're going to measure it, somewhere around 8. And the reason I say that is I had the good fortune in working with many of the food and ag groups on the Southern Gulf Islands. And they're doing tremendous work on the ground, whether it's offering courses, offering equipment that they can provide for people who want to do their own food processing or growing. It's the idea of getting together and sharing ideas, because one of the things that the Food Resilience Alliance did was it sponsored a number of roundtables, and that brought people together from the different islands to discuss a focused theme, and that could be a food hub or food banks or hay, of all things. And hay is important if you're raising animals, and getting it on the islands is a real pain. So why I'm optimistic is that there is so much good work going on now. We just need to support these people and really encourage them and provide them the tools and the financing. Getting the financial support is key for a lot of these volunteer groups to let them keep doing the good work. And I think we can find it. I'm optimistic.
Thank you, Ed. And that's also a great tie to one of our breakout groups. We're going to be talking about fundraising and the financial part with Graham and Chris, who is part of our showcase later on. And there'll be other topics as well. Just a reminder to everybody else who's listening, we do encourage you to put in comments and questions into the chat and have a lively discussion on going on there. It's part of the beauty of this way of connecting, is we can have kind of many levels of things going on. So please do participate that way. I see somebody with their hand up. We're going to hold off questions for now until the end. But Patricia, if you did want to put something into the chat, that way we can capture that for later. And I can maybe introduce that to the panelists as well as we're going along. And that goes for everybody. So yeah, let's keep the discussion going. Anybody else want to jump in on this question about their optimism or respond to anything that they've heard so far from Nick or Ed. Emma, I'm thinking about you. You're one of those groups that Ed's talking about supporting. Are you feeling supported right now? Is there enough support going on? What's your optimism around that?
There's never enough money. I mean, that's if that's what support means. I don't think anybody gets into growing food who doesn't have a sort of optimistic nature. You know, I think growing is a fundamentally hopeful act, and I am hopeful about the enthusiasm that has been kind of groundswelling around where food comes from and how to be more sustainable. I've been working with the food program for about 10 years. The food program's been around for about 12 years. And I am starting to realize that I'm not the newest person on this block anymore. And so there's lots of hope that comes from seeing folks get into this discussion with like enthusiasm and keen energy. And some, I mean, I wouldn't say pessimism, that's too strong, but a little bit of realizing that some folks are coming to this conversation and they are slamming their head against the same walls that we've been hitting for the years that we've been doing this work. And that's a little bit discouraging. And I feel more of a sense of how the food justice movement fits into bigger issues around poverty and housing. And those, I can't solve those by myself. So there's those pieces also that I think are a little bit of a reality check for me. But I'm very, I have, you know, the event we just did last week, 5 minutes before we opened the doors, I was very like, do people need to have these conversations? These guys all know each other. Is there any point in doing this? And then we send out the follow-up survey that night and people are like, oh my God, I so needed that. I haven't been able to connect with people. You know, we never see each other, especially in the pandemic. And so that's really encouraging and gives me hope that it's worthwhile.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. And also don't want to, your pessimism is welcome as well as optimism. And knowing that you've been in this for a while, I can really see that, you know, the same blockages, and it sounds like particularly around systemic inequality, economic inequality, and bigger issues, those can definitely feel like a brick wall at times. And I'm sure lots of people can relate to that. Graham, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I'll throw in my 2 cents here. I'm maybe not as optimistic as the first 3. I'm more like a 6.5, and that largely has to do with the land access issues and the number of farmers I'm seeing coming on to the scene. I'm a first generation farmer, meaning neither of my parents were farmers, and I can tell you the farming scene is not big. There are not very many small scale organic growers around, or even much larger than that. I mean, our Gulf Islands I think are particularly rich in growers and people who know how to grow and have experience with that. But to be honest, I see land get turned into horses and hay for leisure more often in the last few years than I do into people that are actually going to grow any reasonable amount of food. I think what's missing is people who are aiming at being mid-sized growers. You know, I think we need to have lots of small growers, but it's a really hard go. It's really hard to make a living when you're doing that. And to be able to have the skill level to scale up to something that's medium scale to actually meet supplies of our islands, I think is challenging. And to do so, you would need to have solid land access and solid housing, both of which are difficult to come by on Gulf Islands. And you know, if you can't have those solid footings, why are you going to put food in the ground? You know, why are you going to invest in those seeds? And I agree with Emma. It's you know, growing food is hopeful, and I think the food grows very well here, so we have lots of opportunity to grow a lot more. I just think I don't see people choosing farming as a career in the volume that I think is necessary. I still see lots of foreign, when I say foreign food, I mean off-island food, industrial food. It's all in our grocery store still. And until that stops happening with at least the food that we know we can grow where we are, then there's lots of room for other people to grow, you know?
Yeah, thanks, Graham. I'm actually wondering, Nick, if you want to jump in there too, as somebody who's just getting into farming. here, and what's your perspective on this? I'm assuming you're a small scale farmer as well. You're in the same
Yeah.
kind of boat as Graham. Yeah.
Yeah, it's bloody hard work, and there's not enough of us doing it. It's incredibly difficult to compete with the economies of scale and the economies of, you know, foreign distributed supply chains. I think the quest to create more self-sufficiency, local, you know, community food resilience is huge, because to grow on these islands, you know, in the type of climate that we have, without using a lot of mechanized machinery and resorting to the destructive practices that, you know, churn out empty calories in the masses. I think it takes a lot of people and a lot of, you know, human labor, and there's a steep learning curve, and it's not easy to do. I mean, if you have a bad season, that's a whole year of farming that, you know, you can't just replant those seeds right away. And so the startup costs, the capital requirements are tremendous. I think really my hope lies in the fact that as prices are increasing in the grocery stores, as people are becoming more aware that the food that they eat, you know, doesn't just magically appear in the grocery stores, it actually gets grown somewhere, and that somewhere may have, you know, bad harvest, and the shelves don't always get restocked immediately. I think the desire to learn how to grow food again, that's what kind of compels me to think that, you know, we might figure a way out of this, because food is so central. You know, everybody needs to eat, and so if we're starting to see shortages in the grocery stores and shortages in our food system, then it's time to figure out how we can support those people who want to grow but maybe don't know how, you know, haven't done it as much, to have ways to sort of pick up the pace as the crisis unfolds. And how we do that is, I think, multifaceted, but yeah, it's time to kind of get organized so that as, you know, food supplies become more tenuous, we're able to respond in a good way.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, great to hear. Oh yeah, so yeah, let's go just right to Nancy. Go ahead, Nancy.
Yeah, this is a great discussion, and you know, Ed and Emma and I have been in lots of meetings together. We're all part of the Food Resilience Alliance, and the same kind of there is always optimism, and there's always sort of this like rolling our eyes, same old pessimism that we don't want to fall into, right? It's like, okay, it comes down to funding, it comes down to housing, comes down to labor. Well, okay, all of those things are all connected, and it gets really, for sure, can feel really, it's hard to be like, come on, grow food, when we don't know if you're actually going to be able to make a living, and maybe you won't even have a house to live in, but come on, come go grow for us, grow for the, you know, a bunch of tourists that are going to come here and buy possibly everything from you, and you may not even feed any of your islanders in a week. Like, you know, there's all those kinds of things that we think of, but the things that give me hope when I'm thinking about it, is, for one, being part of the Food Resilience Alliance. So there's the Galiano Community Food Program, there's the Gulf Islands Food Co-op, there's the Main Island Agricultural Society, there's the Southern Gulf Islands Community Resource Center. I think that's everybody. And the Pender Island Recreational Agricultural Hall Association, and the Pender Island Farmers Institute. So, you know, there's a bunch of us that have all been thinking about this stuff and doing work in this realm for a long time, but to be able to like talk to each other about things and have just like, you know, a little meeting here and there. I've had like individual meetings with Ed and with Emma and like with other members of the group. So just being able to know that we can kind of vent to each other, or, you know, question each other and ask like, is there something else we could do together that could be really helpful? So that's been really hopeful for me. And then also we've, the Gulf Islands Food Co-op have started to support the local seed libraries, which has been a really fun way of engaging the community in growing food. So We helped launch the one on Pender Island. There was already a very well-established one on Galiano, and Main Island just started one. Saturna is just a really small population, so we just haven't, really gone hard on trying to get the seed library established. But the idea that that the coordinators of the seed libraries on each island are all now able to talk to one another. And then we can really start talking about, okay, regional seeds. And then we can start talking about that to the average person who may not be quite connecting all of the dots to, like, if the system goes down, we still need to plant food, right? How do we plant food? Well, let's talk about seeds. Let's talk about how our neighbors are doing things. Where are the amendments we would have on the islands, like, manure or seaweed, or, all those things that we have available. It's just all these little ways of connecting are just really key in all of us moving forward. And even being part of the closing the supply gap. I see Patricia is in the meeting, Patricia Reichart. That's been really great too, to see a connection between the Southern Gulf Islands and the capital region as a whole, because often, I don't know about the other Gulf Islands, but like for us, we feel sometimes like we're like this little forgotten region of, 10,000 people, but it's like so hard to, get around and get connected. And we're kind of not quite enough connected to the main, to Vancouver Island, that we're a little bit forgotten. So it's great to be able to like connect with all of each other, and also with the bigger things that are happening in the CRD itself. So I'm really optimistic about basically the amount of collaboration and connection that's really being understood to be an important aspect of food system resilience now.
Thank you so much for that, Nancy. And there was a request in the chat if you would be able to just write out the list of the organizations that you mentioned. I think people would love to look those up and link them. So that's, if you would be willing to do that before we finish up today. Thank you. So just to round out our first round here, Philippe, anything you want to share? Particularly, I know that you're involved in lots of collaborative type things. But yeah, where's your optimism at? Where are you?
I'm probably similar to Graham, actually. I'm on probably a 6, because I've had a past life as a farmer on Cortes, so you kind of appreciate the huge thumb on the scale that happens with the global economy. So that I could be producing some wonderful product that is selling well on the island, but still I can't compete with something flowing in from Mexico, California, that's like, $2 a pound for something that I couldn't possibly produce for that. And then the challenges where you have maybe a restaurant on the island or a grocery store, and they have to make a living and they can't afford my prices. And they're saying, can you match this stuff from child labor in Mexico? And I say, I can't, I can't do that. So it's a huge challenge. So I kind of appreciate that isn't going away anywhere, soon, unless those supply chains become untenable. And maybe that will happen. But I'm optimistic that generally there's always enthusiasm to buy local produce. That's never going away. It's just that the pricing, people are still paying too little for produce. And that's a hard one to square as well, because if you want quality produce, you've got to pay for it. And some people can't, right? So how do you square that? So there's lots that can happen. There's lots of enthusiasm, lots of initiatives that can happen on this island, but we don't know, man or no person is an island. We are connected to the global economy. So, we have to kind of figure out how to deal with that. And that's a challenge that I'm not super optimistic about. But,
Yeah, thanks, Philippe. Thank you all for sharing your honest sort of locations on the scale of optimism and pessimism about things, and really appreciating just the number of perspectives you shared here, and also really enjoying seeing the chat. Lots of great discussion going on there as well. we've heard a lot about kind of cross-fertilizing and cooperating within groups. I'm curious. I think the question just occurred to me, but I'd love to hear some of your wild ideas. That one thing I've heard too is that economics is a big part of this. That when it comes down to it, the access to land, the ability for farmers to support themselves, and the ability for people to pay for locally produced food. I'm curious if any of you want to share some of your visions and your ideas for different ways that we could address this question of economics. Graham.
One idea that's been going around in some conversations on Gabriola that I've been pushing a lot myself is the idea of removing agricultural land from market value. I know if you have farm status or you have just, or you're in the ALR or the part of the ALC, Agricultural Land Reserve, your land is worth less on paper on your BC assessment, but it doesn't mean that the sales value of it is worth less. So I think organizations like, we've just got a brand new land trust, GILS, GILSS, Gabriola Island Land Steward Society, that is in a position to catch land. And by that, I mean, they would steward the land and offer leases to people doing agricultural projects, like, farming. And I think by doing that, you would create more opportunities for access. I think Nick mentioned if you have a bad year, or maybe it was Ed, if you have a bad year, and you got mortgage payments, and you can't make your mortgage payments, well, guess what? It's like, how, that's just a huge weight to carry for the price of land. So my idea is actually move some agricultural lands out of market value and create a different access system. And I think you could do that on our scales on the different Gulf Islands. Maybe that's already happening in different versions. I've heard other people say it. There's lots of different ways to access land. I just think creating something really stable and long-term, with a 99-year lease, like a bank will talk to you when you have a 99-year lease. They won't really talk to you with a 30-year lease. Say if I needed investment to build a barn or buy equipment or something like that. So I just think that now with also the average age on Gulf Islands, I get called kiddo all the time, and I'm in my late 30s. So I think we all know there's a fairly an older population on the Gulf Islands, and maybe they would be in a position to leave some of their land or land that they have to organizations like land trusts to hold them with maybe covenants or something like that. There's some mechanism. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm sure there are ways to facilitate that, to create better land access opportunities, more secure, long ones that don't strangle farmers.
Thank you, Graham. I knew I could count on you for some creative ideas. How about, does that spur any other thoughts for the rest of you, or inspirations? Or do you have ideas that you've witnessed or you have in your mind of different creative approaches we could take? Yeah, Nick, and then Emma.
Yeah, I think a lot about the economic system that we find ourselves stuck in, and in many ways how unfair it is to supporting local and regenerative ways of living and growing food. I see the subsidies that happen for conventional agriculture, for fossil fuels, for destroying the ecosystem, and how so much money is put into propping up these industries that are not wholesome. So the thought has come to me, it's like, well, why couldn't we subsidize good quality food? Why couldn't we subsidize local food? Why couldn't we, as a collection of communities, in the Southern Gulf Islands, find a way that we can finance and support and incentivize more local food being grown? I mean, there's a tremendous amount of knowledge and passion, and let's not kid ourselves. There is a lot of wealth here on these islands, and I think collectively there's every possibility that we could create a model that subsidizes our own local food revolution, so that instead of having to compete with this system that just pumps billions of dollars into offloading poor quality, environmentally destructive, socially inequitable food into our grocery stores, what if we could prop up our own local food systems with, you know, a fund of some sort that's able to incentivize for local growers, for people to earn a living wage, you know, something that actually they can feel secure that they'll have income for their efforts growing food and feeding their community. And, you know, I don't know what exactly it looks like, but I think if we're gonna rally around local food, you know, the economic side of it, we have to find a way to be able to compete. And I don't like to use the word compete, but to put up a fighting stance at not having to get stuck in this subsidy system that is, yeah, making it so hard to grow food and to feed each other.
Great, thank you so much, Nick. Emma, and then Philippe has his hand up as well.
So I'm more excited about overthrowing the system, but I'm in my personal, like, you know, in my work world, not quite that comfortable with risk. So this is not to say that I think that this little Band-Aid is the answer, because I think what Nick's talking about is really a bigger question and where we need to be spending our energy. But I just wanted to share this because I've been surprised at the impact of this. I'm sorry that it doesn't fit on the screen. This is a maybe 3 or 4-year-old project that I did, and Gabriola should steal it because the alliteration is so great. We did different versions of it for farmers, for restaurants. It appears as a laminated card at farmers markets. It appears in front of food in our grocery stores. It appears as a little icon on menus. It's all over the island, and it's surprised me how enthusiastically it's been embraced. And I think one of the secrets to its success has been that we did not specify, it's not an organic certification. You don't have to click any boxes to participate. The goal is to spark conversation between buyers and sellers, and for folks to negotiate their own terms of what they're comfortable with and ask their own questions about what matters to them around, you know, growing practices, et cetera. So that's a little thing that I think speaks to what you're talking about, Mitch. And it's not a super crazy idea, but it's a small idea that was wild and crazy in that it got picked up. And a wild and crazy idea that I'll just throw out there that's very new in my head from like a week ago. We had a presentation from the folks at the BC Land Matching Program, which I really recommend to folks to explore. There's a lot there. And the land matcher mentioned that the ALR, the amount of square footage that's allowed for residential dwelling structures in the ALR has just been increased. And I was excited to hear that because of our housing challenges. And then I was discouraged to realize that ag land in our zoning here on Galiano does not allow accessory buildings, like accessory dwellings, cottages, cabins, which to me is just a missed opportunity for growers to have either support of somebody who might be interested in participating in the growing work that they're doing, or a revenue stream that would come from rental. I don't know that I'm ready to kind of jump in there and take on that 20-year fight with the trust, but it's one of those things to me that's like, we could wave our magic wand and increase housing capacity as well as growing capacity in the same sweep.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I love your combo of simple, doable, and 20-year project. Yeah, and so just to loop back to that slide that you shared, that's what was it called again? Name of it? I didn't quite catch it.
Galiano Grown is the project, and I will put it in the chat.
Great. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, I love that that simple thing that you've seen really big effects from. That's inspiring. Philippe.
Got to unmute. Yeah, I don't know how viable this is, but it's just following up really on Nick's idea of subsidies. And something that has occurred to me, and maybe it's another 10-year battle, is that maybe if you subsidized local restaurants, local stores through some kind of provincial, federal thing, where if they bought locally, they would be, offered some kind of subsidy to buy local. So I think that would be fairly easy to implement, because it's kind of, it just clearly encourages local consumption of locally produced stuff. And I don't know if that's something that, if you lobbied together with a whole bunch of food producers from Vancouver Island and the Gulf Islands, that, would have any traction. But that's often occurred to me as a way of maybe just evening up the playing field for people. Right.
Sorry, I was muted too. Ed, yeah, go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, I think certainly Pat is on this Zoom meeting tonight, but the whole idea of a values proposition underlying a whole new approach to how we do things in terms of short supply chains, and she can speak to that with closing the supply gap. But I think that's where you need to start the community conversation. It's you're not buying a head of lettuce from your local farmer, you're buying a community. And that's where we need to start the whole conversation. And I talked to a couple of people on Galiano in terms of how do we advance this? Well, the only way you advance anything is if you put money into it. And I think it was Nick who said, it's going to take money, and there's money on these islands. I think we need to move that conversation forward. And I do know there are people who would be willing to start to put money into a community investment fund. And maybe that's what it's going to take to not necessarily just buy land. That's great. But I would like to see it advanced into areas that the RAAN is now looking at. That's a BC government program of regenerative agriculture and agri-tech network. I think there may be funding coming out of that. And in some ways, there's opportunities, I think, to mesh what may come out of that program with the Islands Trust. And a number of us are living with the Islands Trust in terms of preserve and protect. You could look at closed environment ag, you could look at container or vertical ag, and you probably saw a number of press releases lately about vertical agriculture suddenly becoming an in thing with the BC government. Well, it doesn't take a lot of land, and it doesn't have to take prime soil. And I think that we need to explore a number of these kinds of things. And because you asked, Mitch, how about going way out in a limb, actually out in the water and off the land altogether? Seaweed farming. I've been pushing seaweed farming since I heard about it. And right now, the Wasanich people have a great project with Cascadia Seaweed. They've got the largest seaweed farm operation off James Island now in the Sailor Sea, I believe. And that just opens the door for everything from eating, grazing lower on the food chain, creating a whole new line of products for human consumption, looking at fertilizers, looking at a plastic substitute, looking at how to sequester carbon, looking at how not to pour any kind of fertilizers in, because seaweed grows fantastically quickly with just sunlight and drawing nutrients out of the water. So there you go, Mitch. If you want some speculative stuff, that's out in that library section that says speculative agriculture. There you go.
Speculative agriculture. Thank you so much. So we're just coming up to the end of our time here. I thought I'd make a space for Nancy to have one last word, and then I think we're going to probably be closing up the room and moving into our breakouts and having discussions there as well. Nancy, did you want to share anything before we close out our time?
Yeah, I'll just say, yeah, it's great to have these conversations. It's always helpful just to refresh all of us too, and realize that we have people that we can lean on and talk to. And one thing I think that, you know, we haven't talked about in this conversation side, Ed just brought up a little, is the absence of the First Nations culture in a lot of our discussions about how we move forward with agriculture and what that means to reconciliation on how we approach the land. There's a great quote by Sarah Jim that, you know, restoration acts are a physical act of decolonization. And that's sort of just a nice idea to be thinking about when we're looking at the land, that it's not just food, it's not just land for production and for economy, but it's also, you know, to connect us further to the land, and that the land provides, and that, you know, we're in a shared partnership, that if we take care of the land, then it also takes care of us, and we're all one. So I just I think it's important to just be thinking about that when we're also thinking about the economics of food production. And so sometimes it can get a little bit you know, just out of our hands. We start to fall back into the trap of well, we have to compete in the industrial food system. And yes, we absolutely have to be able to make a living. But how can we do that in a really sustainable, fulfilling sort of way moving forward?
Thank you. Well, excellent way to close, bringing that perspective, Nancy. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for being here, Ed, Emma, Graham, Philippe, Nick, and Nancy. Just going to pause for a second and look through our chat here. Really great discussion there. I would love to share this chat, you know, transcript somehow with everybody here. Maybe we can make that happen at RIEP. Francine, I saw jumping in enthusiastically, championing what we're doing here with RIEP, the inter-island partnership that we're really trying to grow, and as an organization that can facilitate the kinds of connections and collaborations that we're talking about. So please, Francine's always open to ideas and new collaborations, and please do reach out to her. We're going to end our time together with a showcase, and Chris Hall is here. It's a short film that was made about a project called Loving Off the Land that came about in the last couple of years. Chris, I wondered if you want to say anything to introduce this film before we show it.
Yeah, sure. I think it's just a trailer for the film that's coming out. But yeah, basically when the pandemic hit, my girlfriend and I both found ourselves out of work, and obviously not in dire straits or anything, but grocery stores were starting to run out of things, and started to really think about our food. And we've been fortunate enough, both of us growing up, that it wasn't something we had to think about, and it kind of put things in perspective for us just on how reliant we were, you know, on corporations and big change to provide us with our basic needs, and what would happen if we didn't have that. So we embarked on a 365-day challenge to only eat what we could catch, grow, harvest, or raise without buying a single thing from a grocery store. So this is kind of our story of how that went.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to show this film. It's an inspiring look at a way that we can inspire others. Just before we do, I'm just going to ask Francine or Amber, maybe if we could put the contacts for all our panelists, because there's been some requests for that as well. So yes, thank you, Chris. Kaya, do you want to start the trailer? Thanks.
Sitting on the couch one night and watching the news.
The World Health Organization has just declared that this is a pandemic.
And seeing what was going on all over the world.
We've seen the empty shelves in grocery stores as people panic shop.
Pender is magical to me. From the moment I got here, I knew there was something different, but we rely on ferries importing from the mainland.
You know, not knowing what level it would escalate to was frightening.
One night, Chris came with this crazy idea to live off the land and be completely self-sufficient.
Being on the ocean and spending time here as a kid, I was fairly confident in my fishing skills and knew that we'd be able to crab and prawn and rely on the ocean a lot for our food.
I didn't have any gardening skills. I didn't have any farming or agricultural background. So I knew there was a lot I was gonna have to learn. We knew it would be tough, but we also knew we could do it.
Must be nice.
Wonderful. Thanks, Chris, for sharing that trailer with us. Do you want to say something about what the project, where it's at right now, and when you're hoping to release the full film?
Yeah, for sure. I'll start off saying too, they make it a little bit more dramatic than I think it actually is. But,
Well, that's what film's all about.
yeah, it actually comes out on Friday, and we've also been documenting the whole journey on our YouTube channel as well, which is Loving Off the Land. So really kind of shows our trials and tribulations. And you know, it was interesting as a couple of amateurs. I think a lot of times it's sort of experts going through this and living off the grid, and people who've done it for 10 years and people with far more experience for us. So it was a really interesting experience for people without that background to kind of see what it would be like and what it would take to do it.
Yeah. So where can people find the film when they want to see this whole thing?
Yeah, we'll be posting links on Friday. So either Facebook or YouTube. If you look up Lovin, Lovin Off the Land, you can follow us on there. And we'll be posting lots of links on Friday. It'll be on a streaming service called From the Field that we'll kind of be sharing. Lots about that coming up.
Great. Okay. I imagine you might want to do some screenings some places as well. So wishing you like lots of success with that project. Thanks for sharing. And that's a really wonderful way to close out our time.